The Adoshan cadets screamed, a dozen alien throats shrieking as one, writhing in their seats in pure horror as Colonel Philip Clark calmly described how his fellow human Marines had torn through the Crixian enemies. Clark strode through the classroom, his grim visage reflected in the cadets' wide, unblinking eyes. His cyberarm whirred as he gestured, the servos loud in the ringing silence. So there we were, pinned down, outmanned, outgunned, Crixian blasters tearing through our front ranks like tissue, casualties at 70% and climbing. Clark leaned forward, holding the trembling cadets captive with his steely gaze. That's when Captain Lee and I exchanged a look, and I knew we were thinking the same thing. We both stood up as one, hoisted our fusion rifles high, and bellowed, "For Earth and Terra!" And we charged. A cadet whimpered. Another's mouth opened and closed soundlessly in shock. The cadets were learning in brutally vivid detail why Crixia's most battle-hardened troops whispered of human insanity and of the monsters that lurked beneath mankind's outwardly calm demeanor. The Adoshan Military Academy on New Proxima Colony had brought Clark in, battered and scarred, his body as much titanium alloy as flesh and bone, to teach the cadets the tactics that had turned the tide of the siege of Tannhauser Gate. But no dry academic lesson could have conveyed the raw, primal ruthlessness that had seen mankind weather 70% losses, only to rally and surge back at the enemy in a berserk, war-crying tide. As Clark spoke, the cadets saw reflected in his gaze the horrors of that battle, horrors that had ushered in a tenuous armistice. But some feared, in New Proxima's halls of power, that the armistice would soon shatter, as Crixian battle fleets gathered at the edges of contested space. And so these cadets, the brightest of their generation, the future defenders of the colony, had to understand humanity's terrible, wonderful secret, that when pushed to the wall, when all seemed lost, mankind's supreme stubbornness was an unbreakable shield, and its vengeful fury an unstoppable sword. The Crixians had learned that to their sorrow. The cadets now had to learn it too, if they were to stand shoulder to shoulder with their human allies in the wars to come. Clark fixed the weeping, shaking cadets with his indomitable stare. We did not stop. We did not falter, even as we choked on the ashes of our own dead. Because we couldn't. Because Earth was counting on us. Terra was counting on us. We were humanity's line in the sand, and we held it. With our lives, with our rage, with our love for each other and our world, until the enemy broke against us like a wave against the shore. Clark lifted his head, jaw set like iron. That, cadets, is how humans fight when all the chips are down. That is how we win. The alien cadets filed into the simulation room, their faces a mix of anticipation and trepidation. Colonel Clark stood at the front, his cyberarm gleaming under the harsh lights. Today you will learn the art of asymmetric warfare, he said, his voice a low growl. You will face a superior enemy, outmatched and outgunned. You will have to think like humans to survive. The room dissolved into the war-torn landscape of Helios Prime. The cadets suddenly thrust into the heart of the battle. Crixian tanks rumbled in the distance, their energy cannons gleaming with deadly promise. The cadets scrambled for cover, their traditional tactics useless against the onslaught. Ilara, crouched behind a crumbling wall, suddenly remembered Colonel Clark's stories. "Lure them into the city," she shouted over the din of battle. "We can use the tight spaces to our advantage." Her team nodded, purpose etched on their alien features as they melted into the rubble. Across the battlefield, Zyrax bellowed orders to his squad. "Hit and run, just like the humans. Don't let them pin us down." The burly Kronoth led his team in a daring series of strikes, whittling down the Crixian numbers with each lightning-fast assault. Talon, meanwhile, had slipped behind enemy lines. His lithe form darted from shadow to shadow, his team scavenging fallen Crixian weapons. Soon the captured techs sang in their hands, energy bolts slamming into the backs of the bewildered Crixians. Slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. The Crixians, confounded by the unpredictable tactics, faltered under the relentless assault. As the last virtual enemy fell, the simulation dissolved, revealing the triumphant cadets. Colonel Clark nodded, pride glinting in his battle-hardened eyes. But the moment of victory was short-lived. Clark's comm crackled to life, an urgent message from Governor Velos flashing across the screen. The colonel's brow furrowed as he read, the cadets shifting uneasily at his darkening expression. In her quarters, Alara hunched over her console, the forbidden file flickering before her eyes. "Operation Carthage," she whispered, her heart pounding as she scanned the encrypted data. The secrets it held were staggering, the implications terrifying. She had to tell someone, but who could she trust? Light years away, Admiral Zoval stood on the bridge of his flagship, the stars of contested space wheeling outside the viewports. His talons clicked against the console as he studied the tactical display, a predatory smile spreading across his avian features. "Set course for New Proxima," he hissed, his voice a razor's edge. "It is time to teach the humans the price of humiliation." The warfleet leapt forward, the void swallowing them as they sped towards their unsuspecting target. On New Proxima, Colonel Clark stared out at the bustling colony, Governor Velos's message still ringing in his ears. A critical resource shortage, a ticking clock, and a governor too weak to do what was necessary. Clark's lips pursed, the servos in his cyber arm whining with the force of his grip. He had faced worse odds before, but never with so much at stake. He thought of the cadets, so young and full of promise, now thrust into a war they never asked for. He thought of the colony, a fragile beacon of hope in a hostile galaxy. And he thought of Earth, of Terra, of the homeworld he had sworn to defend with his last breath. Colonel Philip Clark, hero of Tannhauser Gate, turned from the window, his eyes hard with willpower. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, he would not fail them. Not again. The Crixians were coming, but this time, humanity would be ready. Colonel Clark's comm buzzed again, this time with an encrypted message from Governor Velos. His teeth clenched as he read the contents, the servos in his cyber arm whirring softly. "Cadets," he barked, his voice cutting through the post-simulation chatter. "Report to Briefing Room Alpha in 1 hour. Full combat gear." As the alien students filed out, a mix of excitement and trepidation on their faces, Clark's gaze fell on Alara. The young cadet's eyes were wide, her posture rigid. She knew something. 58 minutes later, Clark stood before the assembled strike team. Alara, Zyrax, Talon, and Caro. The briefing room's holo display flickered to life, revealing a desolate planetoid. "This," Clark said, his voice low and grave, "is Outpost Sigma 9, abandoned Crixian facility, now our ticket out of this mess." Ilara's hand shot up. "Sir, I found the files on Operation Carthage." The room fell silent. Clark's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on her. "Then you know what's at stake, cadet." He tapped the console and the image zoomed in on a heavily fortified structure. "Our target, a weapon that could turn the tide of this war or plunge us into chaos." Zyrax, the burly Chronoth, leaned forward. "What kind of weapon, sir?" Clark's expression darkened. "The kind that makes grown men weep, cadet. The kind that keeps admirals up at night." Talon, her lithe form coiled with tension, spoke up. "Sir, with all due respect, this sounds like a job for special forces, not cadets." "You're all we've got," Clark replied, his voice edged with steel. "Governor Velos would shut this down if he knew the details. We go in quiet, we go in fast." Caro, the reserved Adoshan, raised a trembling hand. "And if we fail, sir?" Clark's organic eye met Caro's gaze. "Then New Proxima falls, and with it, our last hope of holding the line against the Crixian advance." The room fell silent as the weight of the mission settled on the young cadets' shoulders. Clark studied their faces, seeing in them the same mix of fear and commitment he'd worn all those years ago at Tannhauser Gate. "Gear up," he ordered. "We drop in 30. As the team dispersed, Alara lingered. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the files, they mentioned your involvement in the weapon's creation." Clark's shoulders sagged, the weight of his past visible for a fleeting moment. "We all have ghosts, cadet. This mission, it's a chance to put some of mine to rest." The Prowler-class stealth shuttle cut through the inky void, its adaptive hull rendering it nearly invisible against the backdrop of space. Inside, Clark ran the team through last-minute checks, his voice steady despite the tremor in his organic hand. Remember your training, he said as the shuttle began its descent. Think like humans. Adapt, improvise, survive. The landing was textbook, the shuttle touching down in a narrow ravine a click from the facility. As the team disembarked, the harsh landscape of Sigma-9 stretched before them, a world of jagged rock and deep shadows. Clark's cybernetic eye scanned the horizon, its targeting systems painting potential threats in lurid red. Move out, he growled, and may whatever gods you believe in have mercy on our souls. As the strike team advanced towards the looming silhouette of the Crixian outpost, the first faint traces of dawn began to paint the alien sky. The mission to secure or destroy a weapon that could reshape the galaxy had begun. Turned into a desperate race against time. The team infiltrated the facility with practiced efficiency, Clark's cyberarm interfacing with ancient Crixian tech to bypass security measures. But as they reached the weapon's core, alarms blared. "We've got company," Zyrax growled, hefting his plasma rifle. Clark's face hardened. "Talon, Caro, hold the entrance. Ilara, with me." They sprinted down twisting corridors, the facility shuddering as Crixian forces breached the outer defenses. In the central chamber, a pulsing orb of energy hung suspended, its power crackling through the air. "Sir," Ilara whispered, "is that—" "Yes," Clark replied, his voice grim. "The heart of Operation Carthage." As Clark worked to disarm the weapon, Ilara's comm crackled. Talon's voice strained and urgent. "Multiple hostiles. We can't hold them off much longer." Clark's fingers flew over the control panel, sweat beading on his brow. "Almost there," he muttered. "Just need to—" The chamber doors blew inward. Crixian troops poured through, energy weapons blazing. Ilara dove for cover, returning fire with precision born of countless simulations. "Sir," she shouted, "we have to go." Clark's organic eye met hers, a lifetime of hard choices reflected in its depths. Not without destroying this abomination. With a snarl of effort, he plunged his cyberarm into the weapon's core. Energy surged through him, systems overloading. The facility trembled, cracks spiderwebbing across the walls. "Run!" Clark roared, his body racked with pain. Ilara hesitated for a heartbeat, then sprinted for the exit. The world dissolved into chaos, explosions, screams, the searing heat of energy discharges. She found Zyrax supporting a wounded Talon, Caro providing covering fire. They stumbled into the shuttle, the outpost collapsing behind them. As they lifted off, Ilara stared at the empty seat where Clark should have been. The return to New Proxima was a blur of debriefings and recriminations. Governor Velos raged at the unauthorized mission, but fell silent when presented with the data they'd recovered. The weapon was destroyed, but at a terrible cost. Ilara stood at the viewscreen, watching ships evacuate the colony. Alarms blared as the first Crixian vessels translated into the system. "Cadet!" a familiar voice rasped. She turned, eyes widening. Colonel Clark stood there, battered and scorched, but alive. His cyberarm hung useless at his side, but his organic eye blazed with commitment. "Sir," she breathed, "how—" "No time," he cut her off. "We have a colony to defend." As Crixian dropships streaked through the atmosphere, Clark's voice rang out over the comms. "All units, this is Colonel Clark. Initiate Protocol Omega. I say again, Protocol Omega is in effect." The cadets exchanged grim looks. They had trained for this, but now theory became brutal reality. As the first explosions rocked the outskirts of the colony, Ilara felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up to see Clark, his face etched with lines of pain and determination. "You ready for this, cadet?" Ilara checked her weapon, thinking of all they had learned, all they had sacrificed to reach this moment. She nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, sir." Clark's lips quirked in a humorless smile. "Then let's show these Crixian bastards how humans fight." Together they strode towards the sound of battle, ready to write the next chapter in humanity's struggle for survival among the stars. The evacuation alarms wailed across New Proxima as the Crixian vessels breached the outer defense perimeter. Colonel Clark barked orders into his comm unit, orchestrating a desperate rearguard action. Zyrax, take your squad and cover the spaceport. Ilara, get those civilians onto the transports. Ilara sprinted through the chaos, herding panicked colonists towards the waiting ships. The ground shook as orbital bombardments rained down, shattering buildings and cratering streets. "Move, move," she shouted, her voice raw. A child stumbled, and Ilara scooped him up without breaking stride. As the last transport lifted off, Clark's voice crackled over the comm. "All units, fall back to extraction point Alpha." Ilara and her team fought their way through waves of Crixian shock troops, their weapons blazing. They reached the rendezvous just as Clark's shuttle touched down, its engines screaming. "Go, go, go!" Clark roared as they piled aboard. The shuttle rocketed into the upper atmosphere, weaving through a hail of anti-aircraft fire. Through the viewport, Ilara watched New Proxima burn, her heart clenching. Days stretched into weeks as the ragtag fleet of survivors limped through uncharted space. Ilara found Clark on the bridge of the command ship, his face haggard as he studied star charts. "Sir," she said softly, "we've reached the Asira cluster." Clark nodded, his cybernetic eye whirring as it scanned the data. "Any sign of pursuit?" "Negative, sir, but—" Ilara hesitated. "Threx still isn't talking." Clark's organic eye narrowed. "Then we'll have to make do without Crixian intel. Prep a landing party for that moon." The makeshift outpost on the lunar surface was a far cry from the gleaming colony of New Proxima. Ilara helped erect prefab shelters, as Clark coordinated with Governor Velos and the alien elders. A week into their stay, Ford's Marines returned from a scouting mission with news that sent a ripple of hope through the survivors. "Erida Prime," Ford reported, projecting a hollow image of a blue-green world. "Atmosphere's breathable, plenty of water and arable land." Clark's eyes gleamed. This could be our new home. The debate raged for days. Velos urged caution, while the alien elders feared provoking further Crixian aggression, but hunger and desperation tipped the scales. As the vanguard prepared to depart for Erida, Ilara found Clark checking his gear one last time. "Ready for this, cadet?" he asked, echoing words spoken a lifetime ago on New Proxima. Ilara nodded, her eyebrows furrowed. "Let's make this one count, sir." The descent to Erida was smooth, but the planet's surface proved less welcoming. Massive predators stalked the forests, while virulent spores choked the air in lowland swamps. Ilara's team pushed through, combining human guerrilla tactics with alien tech to carve out a foothold. They erected sonic barriers to repel fauna and used Chronoth terraforming pods to purify local water sources. On the third day, as they expanded the perimeter, long-range scanners lit up. "Crixian scout vessel entering the system," Zyrax reported, his scales overflowing. Clark's face hardened. "They've found us. Time to show them what we've learned." The vanguard sprang into action, jury-rigging plasma cannons from salvaged engines and crafting sensor-baffling camouflage from local flora. As Crixian dropships descended, Ilara led her squad through dense underbrush, circling behind the enemy's landing zone. Clark's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Wait for my signal. Now!" Ilara's team erupted from cover, catching the Crixians in a devastating crossfire. Makeshift grenades detonated, scattering the invaders. From concealed positions, Clark called in pinpoint strikes from their cobbled-together artillery. The battle was short and brutal. As the last Crixian fell, a cheer went up from the human and alien defenders, but their elation was short-lived. "Sir," Ford called out, his face pale, "that scout. It got a transmission off before we took it down." Clark's expression turned grim. "Then we don't have much time. We need to fortify this position and—" "Belay that order, Colonel," Governor Velos's voice cut in over the comm. "We can't risk further provocation. Prepare for immediate evacuation." Anger flashed in Clark's eyes. "Governor, with all due respect, if we run now—" "That's an order, Colonel. We leave within the hour." As the survivors scrambled to break down their hard-won outpost, Ilara noticed Clark standing apart, his fists clenched. She approached cautiously. "Sir, what are your orders?" Clark turned, his face a mask of nearly unleashed fury. "Our orders, cadet, are to abandon everything we fought for." Again. But before Alara could respond, a commotion erupted near the landing zone. She sprinted towards the sound, Clark on her heels. They found a battered figure stumbling out of the tree line. Talon, her uniform in tatters, but her eyes blazing with tenacity. "Talon!" Alara cried, rushing to support her friend. "How did you—" "No time," Talon gasped. "Crixian fleet, inbound, days away. We have to—" She collapsed, exhaustion finally overtaking her. As medics rushed to Talon's aid, Alara locked eyes with Clark. The weight of their situation hung heavy in the air. With the Crixian armada bearing down on them, their fledgling colony faced annihilation. Once again, humanity and its allies stood on the precipice of oblivion. Ilara's mind raced. There had to be a way out, a strategy they hadn't considered. As panic spread through the evacuating colonists, she felt a spark of inspiration. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them, "I have an idea." "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them, "I have an idea." Clark's eyebrow raised, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on Alara. "Let's hear it, cadet." Alara laid out her plan, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The mining equipment. We can use it to create an artificial meteor shower, high-velocity projectiles to cripple their ships." A spark of admiration flickered in Clark's organic eye. Audacious, risky, exactly the kind of move they won't expect. As word spread, the panicked evacuation transformed into frenzied preparation. Alara found herself at the center of a storm, coordinating teams and resources. "Zyrax, I need those seismic charges rigged for remote detonation," she barked into her comm. "Ford, how's the targeting array coming?" The Marine captain's voice crackled back, strained but determined. "Almost there, but we need better intel on Crixian shield frequencies." Ilara's gaze fell on the makeshift brig where Threx, the captured Crixian, sat brooding. She strode over, locking eyes with the alien. "We need your help," she stated flatly. Threx sneered. "Why should I aid my enemy?" "Because if we fail, you die too." A tense moment passed before Threx nodded grudgingly. "Very well, human. What do you require?" As Threx provided crucial data on Crixian defenses, Alara turned to find Talon approaching, her face set with unshakable focus. "I can interface with the captured targeting arrays," Talon offered. "Maximize our impact." Governor Velos stormed up, his face flushed. "This is madness, cooperating with prisoners? We should be running, not—" "With all due respect, Governor," Clark cut in, his voice low and dangerous, "this plan is our best shot at survival. Stand down or stand aside." The colony buzzed with activity as the Crixian armada entered orbit. Alara stood in the hastily assembled command center, holographic displays flickering around her. "All teams, report status," she ordered. Confirmations flooded in, mining rigs repurposed into makeshift artillery, asteroid fields primed for detonation, captured Crixian tech integrated into their patchwork defense network. "Incoming!" Zyrax shouted as the first Crixian ships breached the atmosphere. Alara took a deep breath. "Now!" Seismic charges erupted across the asteroid field. Chunks of rock hurtled towards the Crixian fleet, a relentless barrage guided by Talon's expert targeting. On the lead Crixian vessel, Admiral Vex scoffed at the primitive assault. "Pathetic. Raise shields and—" His words died as the first wave of projectiles tore through his fleet's defenses. Threx's intel had been good. The Crixian shields were useless against the onslaught. "Multiple impacts," Ford reported, his voice thick with exhilaration. "Their capital ships are taking heavy damage." Clark's voice cut through the comm chatter. "All assault teams, prepare for boarding actions. We're taking their ships." Alara watched as Clark led the charge, commandeering crippled Crixian vessels and turning them against their former masters. The tide was turning. But victory, as always, came at a cost. "Alara!" Zyrax's panicked voice filled the command center. "The Crixian flagship, they're charging weapons, energy readings off the charts." Talon's eyes widened in horror. "They're targeting Erida itself, a doomsday strike." Time seemed to slow as Alara faced an impossible choice. Abort the attack and try to evacuate or push forward and risk everything. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then snapped them open. All units, this is Ilara. Concentrate all fire on the Crixian flagship. Everything we've got. The response was immediate. Every salvage weapon, every commandeered ship, every scrap of firepower the colonists could muster, converged on Admiral Vex's vessel. Vex's triumphant sneer faded as his ship buckled under the assault. Impossible, he breathed as systems failed around him. The Crixian flagship disintegrated in a spectacular explosion. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Threx's voice, tinged with awe and fear, broke through. The Crixian command structure, it's collapsing. Without central authority, they can't authorize the colony's destruction. A ragged cheer went up from the surviving colonists. But as the adrenaline faded, the true cost became clear. Erida's surface was scarred by the battle, the fledgling colony in ruins. Ilara stood amid the destruction, her uniform stained with sweat and grime. The Crixian fleet was in retreat, but this victory felt hollow. Clark approached, his cyberarm sparking from battle damage. "Well done, cadet," he said softly, "but our work is nowhere near the end." Ilara nodded, her mind already racing with the challenges ahead. Reconstruction, diplomacy, the fate of their Crixian prisoners. As the twin sons of Erida Prime set on the battered colony, Ilara knew that the true test of her leadership was only beginning. Beginning just yet. Rebuilding would be a monumental task, but one they had no choice but to undertake. In the weeks that followed, Erida Prime transformed into a hive of activity. Ilara found herself thrust into a leadership role she'd never anticipated, mediating disputes and allocating precious resources. "We need more power for the medical bay," Dr. Lena argued, her usually pristine lab coat stained with alien soil. Zyrax's scales rippled with agitation. "The perimeter defenses must take priority. Without them, we're exposed." Ilara raised a hand, silencing the bickering. "We'll reroute power from non-essential systems on a rotating schedule. It's not ideal, but it'll have to do." As she left the makeshift command center, Ilara caught sight of Colonel Clark, overseeing the construction of a fortified bunker. His cyberarm whirred as he effortlessly lifted a steel beam into place. "How are we looking, sir?" she asked, falling into step beside him. Clark's organic eye narrowed. "Better than yesterday, worse than tomorrow." He nodded towards a group of Crixian prisoners, working under guard. "Your idea to put them to work is paying off." Among the Crixians, Ilara spotted Threx, his movements measured and efficient. Nearby, Talon pored over schematics of salvaged Crixian weaponry, her brow furrowed in concentration. A commotion near the colony's central plaza drew their attention. Governor Velos stood atop a crate, his face flushed as he addressed a gathering crowd. "Reckless militarism that brought destruction upon us," Velos shouted, jabbing a finger in Clark's direction. "We should be reaching out to the stars in peace, not provoking more conflict." Ilara felt Clark tense beside her. She placed a hand on his arm. "I'll handle this, sir." Striding into the crowd, Ilara raised her voice. "Governor, now is not the time for divisive rhetoric. Every hand is needed for reconstruction." Velos sneered. "And who are you to silence me, cadet? You're as complicit as Clark in this disaster." Murmurs rippled through the colonists. Ilara held her ground, meeting Velos's gaze steadily. "I'm someone who's fought and bled for this colony. Someone who's seen firsthand the cost of both action and inaction. What have you done besides sow discord?" The crowd's mood shifted, turning against Velos. As he sputtered indignantly, Ilara noticed Talon slipping away from the gathering, her expression troubled. Later that evening, Ilara found Talon in the communications hub, her fingers flying over a console. "What have you got?" Ilara asked, recognizing the intensity in her friend's eyes. Talon's voice was tight. "Long-range sensors picked up something. A lot of somethings. Look." The display flickered to life, showing a vast array of ships moving in formation. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. "Crixian reinforcements?" "Doesn't match their signatures," Talon replied, shaking her head. "This is something else. As they stared at the approaching armada, alarms blared throughout the colony. Clark's voice crackled over the comms. "All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill." Alara's mind raced. They weren't ready for another fight, not so soon. But as she watched the colonists spring into action, she saw willpower etched on every face. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. Together. As the alarms blared, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Stand down! False alarm!" Alara turned to see Valnir, the Ulrathi leader, striding into the command center. His massive frame dwarfed the human equipment around him, chitinous plates gleaming under the harsh lights. "Apologies for the scare," Valnir rumbled, mandibles clicking. "Our long-range sensors are still calibrating to your systems." Clark nodded curtly, cybernetic eye whirring as he assessed the Ulrathi leader. "No harm done. How goes the integration of our forces?" "Progress is acceptable," Valnir replied. "Your asymmetric tactics are unlike anything we've encountered. Intriguing, if unorthodox." Alara suppressed a smile. She'd spent the past few months drilling Ulrathi officers on human guerrilla strategies. Their rigid military doctrine made for some amusing culture clashes. As the false alarm subsided, Alara noticed Talon hunched over a console, brow furrowed in concentration. "What is it?" Alara asked, recognizing her friend's discovery face. Talon's fingers flew over the controls. "I'm not sure, but there's something out there. Way out there." The main view screen flickered to life, displaying a swirling mass of energy at the edge of their sensor range. Valnir's compound eyes widened. "Impossible," he breathed. "You recognize this?" Clark demanded. The Ulrathi leader's voice was grim. "It is a cosmic rift, the work of the Kriarka." "The what now?" Alara asked. "An ancient enemy," Valnir explained. "Biomechanical horrors that nearly wiped out my people eons ago. The Crixians claim to have subjugated them, but—" Clark's organic eye narrowed. "Let me guess, not so subjugated after all." Alarms blared anew as the rift expanded. Grotesque shapes emerged, a nightmarish fusion of flesh and machine that defied description. "Valnir," Clark barked, "rally your fleet. We need to hit them hard and fast." But the colonel's words were drowned out by the cacophony of panicked voices. Colonists and Ulrathi alike scrambled for weapons, for ships, for any means of escape. Alara watched the chaos unfold, her mind racing. As Valnir bellowed orders and Clark prepared for all-out war, she felt a familiar spark of inspiration. "Wait!" she shouted, silencing the command center. All eyes turned to her. "Sir?" Alara said, meeting Clark's gaze. What if we tried to talk to them?" Valnir's mandibles clacked in disbelief. "Madness! The Kriarka cannot be reasoned with." "With all due respect," Alara countered, "you haven't encountered them in millennia. What if they've changed? What if there's a chance for diplomacy?" Clark studied her for a long moment, his cybernetic eye whirring. Finally, he nodded. "It's a long shot, but given our odds, prepare a diplomatic shuttle. You'll lead the mission." As Alara assembled her team, she caught sight of Threx, the captured Crixian commander, watching from his work detail. His eyes gleamed with an unreadable emotion. Talon approached, datapad in hand. "I've compiled everything we know about the Kriarka. It's not much, but—" A violent tremor shook the colony. Outside, the sky churned with eldritch energy as the cosmic rift widened. Alara took a deep breath, steeling herself for the mission ahead. "Let's move out." The shuttle hummed to life, carrying Alara, Talon, and a small diplomatic team toward the writhing tear in reality. As they approached, static filled the comms, and their instruments went haywire. "Alara!" Talon shouted over the growing chaos. "We're losing nav control!" Before Alara could respond, a familiar voice crackled through the shuttle's speakers. "Not to worry, I'll take it from here." Threx. The Crixian commander materialized from a hidden compartment, brandishing a stolen weapon. "I'm afraid I'll be commandeering this vessel. Nothing personal, you understand." Alara's mind raced, searching for a way out of this disaster. But as Threx advanced, the shuttle lurched violently. Warning klaxons blared as they spiraled toward an uncharted moon on the edge of Kriarka space. "Brace for impact!" Ilara yelled, grabbing onto anything solid as the shuttle plummeted through the moon's thin atmosphere. The craft slammed into the desolate surface, skidding across barren rock before grinding to a halt. As the dust settled, Ilara pulled herself from the wreckage, assessing the situation. Talon lay unconscious nearby, a gash on her forehead. Threx was nowhere to be seen, and in the distance, where the cosmic rift pulsed ominously, Ilara could make out the first wave of Kriarka forces descending upon the moon. She activated her emergency beacon, praying it would cut through the interference. But as Ilara surveyed the alien landscape, her gaze fell upon a structure half buried in the lunar soil. Its architecture was unlike anything she'd ever seen. With Talon stirring and the Kriarka approaching, Ilara made a snap decision. She hefted her injured friend onto her shoulders and stumbled toward the mysterious building. Whatever secrets it held, Ilara hoped they might be the key to salvaging this mission, and possibly saving the colony itself. Ilara pushed through the ancient structure's entrance, Talon's weight straining her shoulders. The air inside was stale but breathable. As her eyes adjusted to the dim interior, she gasped. Rows of dormant consoles lined the walls, their alien designs unlike anything she'd encountered. Holographic displays flickered to life as they passed, responding to their presence. "Some kind of weapons lab," Talon mumbled, regaining consciousness. "But whose?" Before Ilara could respond, a familiar voice echoed through the chamber. "Mine!" Threx emerged from the shadows, weapon trained on them. Or rather, my people's. The Crixians didn't subjugate the Kriarka. We created them. Ilara's mind raced, piecing together the implications. "This is a doomsday failsafe." Threx nodded, a grim smile on his face. "Insurance against our own creations. Now, step away from the console." A distant explosion rocked the structure. The Kriarka were getting closer. Ilara tensed, ready to act, when Valnir's voice crackled over her comm. "Ilara, we've engaged the enemy, but we're outgunned. We need a miracle." In that moment of distraction, Talon lunged at Threx. They grappled for the weapon as Ilara dove for the main console. Her fingers flew over the alien controls, guided by instinct and desperation. The lab hummed to life. Holographic schematics materialized, depicting an intricate lattice of energy beams encircling the moon. "No!" Threx shouted, breaking free from Talon. "You don't know what you're doing!" But Ilara did. Somehow she understood. She initiated the sequence, praying her intuition was correct. The moon trembled as hidden generators powered up. Beams of coruscating energy lanced into space, weaving a complex web around the battling fleets. On the tactical display, Ilara watched as the Kriarka ships began to falter. Their synchronized movements became erratic, uncoordinated. "It's working," Talon exclaimed. "Whatever you did, it's disrupting their hive mind." Valnir's voice confirmed it. "The enemy is in disarray. Press the attack." Ilara allowed herself a moment of relief before turning to face Threx. But the Crixian was already moving, fingers dancing across a secondary console. "You may have won this battle," he snarled, "but the war is just the beginning." Alarms blared throughout the facility. Ilara's blood ran cold as she deciphered the warning messages. "Threx, what have you done?" His laughter was cold, maniacal. "Ensured my people's survival. The lattice is set to overload. This moon, your precious allies, the Kriarka, all of it will be atomized." Talon tackled him, but it was too late. The self-destruct sequence was already initiated. As Ilara frantically worked to override the system, a new threat appeared on the sensors. A massive Kriarka biofleet summoned by the psionic backlash of their defeated brethren. With time running out and enemies closing in from all sides, Ilara made her choice. She rerouted power from the overloading lattice, reconfiguring it into a targeted electromagnetic pulse. The facility shuddered as the recalibrated weapon fired. In space, the incoming Kriarka fleet went dark, their biomechanical systems fried by the pulse. But the cost was high. The moon's power grid, including the shipyards, was knocked offline. They were stranded. As the dust settled, Alara surveyed the aftermath. Threx lay dead, killed in the struggle with Talon. The Olrathi fleet regrouped around the moon, victorious but wary. Colonel Clark's voice crackled over the comms, demanding answers. Valnir called for caution, urging diplomacy. Alara took a deep breath, knowing the hardest part was yet to come. She had saved them all, but at what cost? And how would she navigate the fragile alliance in the wake of these revelations? As she stepped out of the ancient lab to face her comrades and deal with the aftermath of her high-stakes endeavor, Alara steeled herself for the challenges ahead. Alara stepped out of the ancient lab, blinking against the harsh sunlight. The moon's surface was a chaos of debris and scorch marks from the recent battle. She surveyed the ragtag group of survivors, human, Olrathi, and a handful of shell-shocked colonists who'd been aboard the diplomatic shuttle. "We need to get off this rock," Talon said, limping to Alara's side. "The generators are fried. It's only a matter of time before life support fails." Alara nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. "Valnir, what's the status of your fleet?" The Olrathi leader's voice crackled over the comms. "Damaged, but operational. We're sending shuttles to your location now." As they waited, Alara and Talon salvaged what they could from the lab. Databanks, weapon schematics, anything that might give them an edge in the conflicts to come. The revelations about the Crixians and their creations had shaken everything they thought they knew about the galaxy. Hours later, a patchwork fleet limped away from the derelict moon. Alara stood on the bridge of the Olrathi flagship, watching as the cosmic rift that had brought such chaos slowly collapsed behind them. "Set course for Erida Prime," Colonel Clark ordered, his voice tight with exhaustion. The journey was tense, filled with heated debates over the implications of what they'd discovered. Humans and Olrathi alike grappled with the realization that their alliance was built on shaky ground. As they entered the outer system, an eerie silence fell over the bridge. Where Erida Prime should have been, sensors detected only a massive debris field. "No," Alara breathed, her heart sinking. "It can't be." Frantic hails went unanswered. The colony was gone, blasted to rubble. Clark's cybernetic eye whirred furiously as he rounded on Valnir. "What have you done? While we were distracted by your Kriarcha, you left Erida defenseless." The Olrathi leader's mandibles clacked in agitation. "We did no such thing. This reeks of Crixian treachery." Before the argument could escalate further, a battered shuttle appeared on their sensors. Its transmission cut through the chaos, chilling Alara to her core. "This is Captain Ford," a familiar voice declared, "or should I say, the savior of humanity's legacy." Ilara's blood ran cold. Ford had been her protege, a promising young officer. Now her voice dripped with fanaticism. "What have you done, Ford?" Clark demanded. "What was necessary," she replied. "The alien influence was a cancer. I cut it out." The truth unfolded in horrifying detail. While they'd battled the Kriarcha, Ford had led an insurrection of human separatists. They'd seized an Olrathi superweapon, a relic capable of purging entire star systems. "You taught us well, Colonel," Ford sneered. "The art of war, the necessity of sacrifice. I simply applied those lessons on a grander scale." Alara watched as Clark's face drained of color. The weight of their actions, the unintended consequences of sharing humanity's martial prowess, crashed down upon them all. Alarms blared throughout the fleet. Radiation levels from the shattered planetoid were rising to fatal levels. They needed to flee, and quickly. As escape pods jettisoned and ships scrambled to escape, Ford's final transmission rang out. "You want to know if that's all we've got? Oh no, my dear teachers, we're just getting started." The remaining energy of the superweapon coalesced into an unstoppable shockwave. Alara grabbed Talon's hand as the blast approached, a silent understanding passing between them. In those final moments, as the extinction wave tore through their convoy, Alara's thoughts turned to the terrible irony of their situation. They had sought to defend humanity by sharing their greatest strengths, only to seed the galaxy with the seeds of their own destruction. The blast engulfed them, and Alara's world went white.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.